Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Here we are.
Yes, here we are again to the temporary podcast that's not so temporary anymore, which I really like. So,
Me as well.
yeah, it's good to be back.
It is. It's a homely feeling.
Yeah, it kind of is. We're in different places and still the togetherness is here. So nice.
Mm. And there you are, dear viewer. And you might ask yourself, so what's going to happen today? We have no idea. So, join us for that ride. Or maybe we have some idea.
Yeah, we had one idea, right? You mentioned that a good subject for today would be patterns.
Yeah. Last week we talked about purpose. Today we're going to talk about patterns, we think.
Yeah.
The trigger for me was a post by Michael Spade, and he shared that sometimes, you know what, to be able to see certain things, you might need a training, you might need an experience, or you need to elevate. You need to elevate your way of thinking or seeing the world because otherwise you cannot see it. You might need a concept, a theory to put words to the experience. And if you don't have it, either you explain the experience the wrong way or you filter out the experience as not important because other things you might have well formulated theories for. So at the workplace, sometimes the experiences going on, it's like we don't even pick up on them because we have no language.
And would you say that we then don't recognize the patterns because we don't have the language?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a very short answer.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. Um,
Does it need a bit of metaphoring or
if you have one, sure. I love metaphors, so if you have a good one, then please throw it at
Or, or,
us.
or the other alternative is that we take it slow and you think about it to process it.
Hmm. When you started talking about this concept or the thing that Michael Spade explained and how you understood it, what triggered me is that it's also part of how we learn. Like everybody goes through the same cycle of learning, but we each have our own learning style that we prefer, but there's four learning styles, and we have to go through them to get into learning. So there's theory, reflection, experimentation, and doing, kind of.
Okay, right.
So from what you said is like if we are doing or experimenting, we're not necessarily reflecting and looking at the theory. But if you connect those, then those patterns start making sense or more sense. And
Hmm.
maybe I link it to the completion of learning is that maybe we're doing things, it's common sense that we do something, but when somebody gives you the model or puts the words to it, then it clicks and you make that connection to make a next step, kind of.
Mm. Oh yeah. Oh, that's a rich field. There's the tendency, of course, to jump to conclusions, so that you have experienced something and you start to say, "Oh, it's this thing. I recognized it," and you actually don't even know exactly why you jump to that conclusion, but it's the easy one to make, so it requires less effort. So you do it. Another thing is to maybe associate to, I think it's called grounded theory. It's a scientific research method where you don't start with a very well-defined hypothesis, but instead the researcher is maybe a bit subjectively living the experience and eventually connects the experience to known science. So that is, you don't limit, you don't filter, you're trying to discover.
Mhm.
Hmm. But as you're saying, the learning cycle, it's interesting. What about wine tasting? That's a metaphor. So,
Okay.
the first time I went to a wine tasting, I didn't really, or a whiskey or coffee, actually. We don't have to be an alcohol. Might it have been the case that before you got the guidance, if you did that, chocolate is also a beautiful example. Someone walks you through the more subtle notes that's actually in there all the time. And when you get help with that concept, you get a bit of language, vanilla, berry, earthy, mineral. And suddenly you find yourself, yeah, exactly. That helps me explain the experience I have on my tongue and in my nose. It might limit it, possibly, but before you have those concepts, you might not fully enjoy the experience as much as you can do with concept. Does this make anything for you? The
Yes,
patterns, yeah?
absolutely. It's also very double what you say now, because I am a I like wine and whiskey and coffee and chocolate, so all of them resonate. Um, and it is indeed the case when you start really consciously tasting it, you get the undertones of taste
Mm.
with it. And it's some yeah, it helps you if people kind of point them out to you. On the other hand, the question that pops up now is how much can you influence this? Because our brain does really weird things with us, right?
Oh yeah.
So if I keep saying to you orange, 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 you're eventually
Mhm.
gonna taste orange while it's
Oh,
maybe
of
not
course.
even there. So that's a
Yeah.
really, really, really interesting metaphor and case to go into. But still, on the other hand, I think the connection with the words really help, and that's like those tastes, those flavors that you get. Those are patterns as well, like right? It's like when you drink a good whiskey, you get like vanilla and peach, and then you get the wood at the end. You get the wood taste from the casks, kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe it's also about, and now that's the word that resonates with me. It's about consciously being there, and linking that metaphor back to the patterns thing. We do a lot of things unconsciously. Like it's a habit, it's what we've always done, it's common sense. But when we consciously start thinking about it, that's where the patterns emerge. So I think
Mm.
consciousness could be a thing in here as well. What do you think?
Yes. It's a couple problem. That's what we can say. You cannot only work with theory and concept, you have to also have experience. You cannot only work with experience, you will have. And it's not necessarily so that we're claiming that more is better. But if you're into this game, to see reality as it is, you will find it using these tools as a probing mechanisms, but not as absolute truths. Just as evolving insights of the reality as it unfolds, it becomes really powerful.
Mhm.
And of course, well, as interesting as the joys of life, like a great wine or chocolate or coffee, uh, what about work then, right? Because now then, if we transpose this into work, human behaviors as they emerge and our ability to pick up on what's really going on. I remember a moment in my life, I was actually embarrassing old before I really started to. I was in the meeting and I thought for guaranteed we are here to talk about the problem and opportunity, and that's what we're doing. That was not at all the case. I realized, like so. No, what we're doing in this meeting is subconsciously, without words, we are really trying to figure out ranking and status. And there's a lot of things going on to shift this. So we're not working the problem. And so at work, before I started to look for these, I was kind of blind to it. I wasn't perhaps interested or not consciously aware. But then I became aware, and so then when a discussion get kind of curiously complicated, what if this has to do about status? And then suddenly, yeah, yeah, that's it, right? And so then instead of trying to convince a person even more about the problem or opportunity, can work the problem differently.
Hmm. I like, yeah, it's really interesting. How many times do you think this pattern happens? Because meetings are, yeah, we spend too much time in meetings, in my opinion, but they're a really interesting thing if you look at it from, with a helicopter view in terms of people dynamics. And so, how many times do you think that a conversation becomes a quest for status to see where am I and where's this person?
uh, um, the human species is really interesting. We have a fantastically dynamical and multifaceted and complicated ranking and status system and belonging. So both hierarchy and us and thems comes into place, like Professor Sapolsky and behave. And so if status is changing or is ambiguous, our amygdala leads front and center. And amygdala is not the same as scientific logical thinking. So it requires a lot of energy to figure this out. Now, how often does that happen? Well, in a context like, say, an agile transformation, say, where you shifted from a more like quote unquote traditional to something that is agile, what we're really doing is we're shifting a lot of statuses.
Absolutely.
But I haven't seen in literature about agile transformation that we really give enough space and tools to work that problem. A manager that has been like for 30 years being conditioned to say that the reason I'm here, I'm valued, is because I'm good at managing people. It's so ingrained as a pattern that it's not even conscious anymore. It's an automation. And to awaken other parts of the personality of this probably beautiful being will require time and effort. Actually, about your post, the principle of scientific management, you will not bring about change beyond a certain pace. There's a
Yeah,
habit that needs to reform. So even 111 years ago, pattern recognition and pattern changing is an art of itself. It's a game you need to learn well.
absolutely. Yes, and linking this whole thing to change, because that's what a lot is, everything is change. It's about learning and unlearning, but also letting go of a certain status and growing into that new status that or that new belonging that we look for.
Mm. Mhm.
Is what I learned about it is it's a super individual thing. If you want to change an organization, like every individual goes through that change and needs to figure out what it means for him or her, and then step into the change or not.
Mhm.
So it's really interesting if we link those in. Um, yeah, that's super logical that it takes time, right? It really takes time for things. It's not that we can announce something and then we all go we throw 200 people in a training course and then there's the change, right? But that's how we deal with it a lot of times.
Ah,
Um, People need to learn. I mean, to create a space and time, and I've posted about this a couple of times already recently, right? Leave the space and time for people to let it sink in, to make sense of it, to sense it, to probe it, see what it means to them, to have conversations about it, and then to let them go into the change or not, because there's always the option of not going into it, right?
probably. Yeah.
Um, and then linking that back to patterns, because that's where it also becomes interesting when we recognize patterns. Sometimes it's a change as well, because sometimes those patterns we recognize we won't like them as much as we could or should. Um, like the pattern you had with the status in the meetings,
Hmm.
that can be a good thing, but also can be it can hold us back or think like how am I going to deal with this, or how can I bring it to this group of people and make us better. at doing a meeting or having discussing a problem or looking for a solution.
Hmm. Yeah. We could do a series with this. You know, patterns and habits are now two words that keep popping up here. And so one might say that we continuously form habits. You could say we form patterns that are automated to some extent, and that becomes like in habit. It's a habit of the sense making and the subsequent actioning, mostly going on habitually and subconsciously because that requires less energy. And every time we want to change that, there needs to be a compelling reason. There needs to be a space for the energy demand, and there needs to be something that motivate us to put in that energy,
Absolutely.
as opposed to just rolling on. And a change, like you said, an individual needs to learn from with their own frame of reference, as it were, or there need to be. It's a very individual, and moreover, Ian, the system that we're looking at is a group of individuals in a multitude of different grouping and constellations, and these also affect. And it's a coupled problem. So individuals and groups influence each other in very complicated and complex ways. And moreover, the organizational structures, flows, and processes influence and are influenced by. So one could say that a very healthy pattern to embrace as a organizational coach or agile coach is to learn how to see complexity and keep any conclusions very lightly.
Absolutely. I think the worst thing to do is to come in and to think that you're right.
Ooh.
If we look at it that way, and then now see, I think it's called the Dunner-Kruger graph, where you have the least you know at a certain point you think you know everything, and they call it Mount Stupid or something. But maybe we're drifting off. Maybe we're drifting off now. But yeah, it's to go back to what you said, Magnus. I think it's very strong. There are so many forces at play, right?
Ooh. Yes.
There's individuals, there's team dynamics, there's cultures, there's systems, there's all these things pool. The politics that are in there between groups and between individuals, and the personalities and everything. Look, I'm just naming out of my head five or six, but those are all forces that pull things and or try to pull things in the direction.
Mm.
And in some way, it's like magnet fields. They kind of make
Oh,
that
yeah.
organization click
Yeah.
together. But becoming conscious of that is, I think it's a good thing. We never know all the patterns, but taking your time to take a step back and observe and trying to gain conscious of those patterns, because those are patterns as well, right? That that might and maybe will help us see change and bring change differently into organizations. Um,
Mm.
and not shout too soon that this is what we're going to do and I am right, but maybe I don't know, and let's see what's happening here before I kind of nudge you into this or this direction. Something. Yeah,
Patterns, habits, etc., etc. Consciousness, awareness. Hmm.
yeah. So, what would be a good wrap for today? With the good conclusion of our talk today, Mike?
Hmm. Oftentimes, we don't see the reality as it is. We see it as we are conditioned. We are doing it habitually, or in other words, we are using the patterns that we already know, and we are a bit lazy. And sometimes that's really helpful. It helps us navigate this complex world with minimum effort. Sometimes, though, it's grossly dysfunctional for the purpose we are here, and being present and actively probing what's here. Stay curious. That's my wrap. What about yours?
I think it's really that's so strong. That's poster words. Really good. Yeah, I don't want to add anything to it. I think it's super complete. Um, Maybe a little bit for people who really, if there are readers out there, if you really want to read into this, Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman gives
Yes.
a lot of great insights. There's an easier version of it called the Chimp Paradox by I think it's called Dave Peters as the writer.
Hmm.
Um, who kind of translates that to our brain is the lazy chimp that's inside of us.
That's a monkey brain.
And sometimes we think with the chimp, and sometimes we think with the human brain. So that would be my addition to your conclusion. And then thank you very much for having this talk with me again, Magnus. Thank you,
Mm.
people, for listening to us and watching us. Let us know what you think. Um, Share your patterns with us.
Yeah. And do you like the pattern of the temporary podcast being kind of weekly? That's a pattern as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Take
Okay.
care.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.